Good evening. My name is Michael Mostyn, Chief Executive Officer of B'nai B'rith Canada. Thank you to all of you for joining us this evening for what will be a very interesting panel discussion on the plight of the Uyghur Muslim in China, and in particular in the western province of China called Xinjiang. So we will be getting to the panel discussion very shortly. It will be chaired by our National Director of the League for Human Rights, Dr. Ron Kashi. Before that, we will hear from federal politicians from several different political parties who we thank for attending tonight and for saying a few words in support of the human rights of the Uyghurs and by extension the rights of minority groups that are oppressed, various minority groups that are oppressed in China today. The plight of the Uyghurs will be brought into greater context a little later on in this program. I would like to just open, though, with a personal account from myself. In the early 2000s, I was appointed to my first professional role at B'nai B'rith Canada when I ran the Ottawa office for the organization as its Director of Government Relations. In the year 2008, I had the privilege of meeting Rabia Kadir, who at that point had become the president of the World Uyghur Congress. She had come to Canada in order to educate Canadian politicians and to begin to sound the alarm about the severe human rights violations that were taking place against her people, and unfortunately which has continued to grow and continued to expand to the present time. But things that I learned from my meetings and interactions with Rabia at that time were really amazing to me, including the fact that I did not know that the name Israel is actually a common first name amongst the Uyghur people that they name their children. There were many commonalities that we discussed, and although I haven't spoken publicly about B'nai B'rith Canada's role going all the way back to 2008 with the Uyghurs on this human rights struggle, it is an important message to let people know about that there are different community groups that work together, and when we see evil, it is all of our duty to say something, stand up, and do something about it. So we hope that you will join B'nai B'rith Canada following tonight's program in our call to action for the Canadian government to stand up, say something, and do something within our own sphere of influence, which is in Canada. There are changes that can be made, and we can have an impact. So thank you again for joining us, and thank you for joining our call to action following tonight's program.
Bonjour, mon nom est Rachel Bendayan, je suis la députée d'Outremont et la secrétaire parlementaire pour la ministre de la Petite Entreprise, la promotion des exportations et le commerce international. Ça me fait plaisir de me joindre à vous pour cette discussion importante et j'aimerais aussi remercier Brian et toute l'équipe à B'nai B'rith pour l'invitation. I'm speaking to you today from one of the small rooms here outside of the House of Commons in Ottawa, but I absolutely did not want to miss the opportunity to address the plight of the Uyghur community. I strongly believe that our Jewish community is well placed to speak out against human rights abuses against our Muslim brothers and sisters. We know, probably more than anyone else, what this means. We understand what is happening right now. Depuis des années, la Chine multiplie les détentions arbitraires des membres de la communauté musulmane ouïghour. Les rapports d'internement, de travail forcé, de stérilisation et d'autres abus de droits de la personne sont extrêmement préoccupants. Le Canada a un rôle à jouer sur la scène internationale maintenant plus que jamais, et nous avons pris les devants. Le Canada a un rôle de leadership parmi ses alliés à l'international. On a pu le voir au mois d'octobre avec notre communiqué à l'ONU aux côtés de 38 autres pays, réclamant à Pékin de respecter ses engagements internationaux et permettre un accès immédiat et sans entrave au Xinjiang pour des observateurs indépendants. Et nous continuerons à nous tenir debout pour nos valeurs. Merci encore de votre invitation. Je vous souhaite une excellente discussion.
Hello, I'm Garnet Jennis, Member of Parliament, and I want to thank B'nai B'rith for your leadership on this issue that we're talking about today and so many other important issues. During the summer, I was part of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights when we did 2 days of intensive hearings on the treatment of Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in China. And what was unveiled through expert as well as survivor testimony is a absolutely horrific situation of mass detention, of forced sterilization, forced abortion, forced insertion of IUDs, efforts to detain, suppress, and reduce births within the Uyghur and Turkic Muslim communities more broadly inside of China. The evidence was such that it led the subcommittee to conclude in a statement released this fall that Uyghurs are subject to genocide, and that the government of Canada and other governments around the world must recognize that they have a responsibility to protect, to act, to deliver on that promise of never again, and to act specifically through Magnitsky sanctions or targeted sanctions against those involved in gross violations of human rights in this particular case, and to introduce new laws to prevent the import of slave labor produced products. Right now in Canada, we have very weak legislation around supply chains, and there's a very real risk that a substantial amount of products made through forced labor inside of China by effectively enslaved Turkic Muslims is making its way into Canada and to Canadian consumers. So we need to address the supply chains issue. We need to impose sanctions in response to these abuses, and Canada must speak out with a strong voice about the human rights abuses that are happening. My own grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and I know seeing these events, seeing 21st century concentration camps has particular resonance and particular importance for the Jewish community. I recently went back to Berlin to visit some of the sites that were important in the Second World War and during the Holocaust, and I remember noticing in particular all the apartment buildings that were kind of close by to where some of these atrocities took place. And I remember thinking about the people who were in those apartment buildings, who would have been able to see what was going on, and wondering how did they feel about what they were seeing, and why didn't they react? Why didn't they do more? But today we don't need to be in apartment buildings because we have satellite images, we have satellite footage, and anybody, anywhere in the world can see these contemporary images of Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims being loaded onto trains, sent to concentration camps. And I know for the Jewish community and for all Canadians and all people everywhere, an awareness of what's going on does and should impel us to action.
Chers amis, encore une fois, la tyrannie et le racisme menacent la vie de millions d'individus. J'appelle à la solidarité de tous et chacun pour dénoncer les actes terribles qui ont lieu dans le Xinjiang à l'encontre du peuple ouïghour. Ces gestes, qui relèvent du génocide, ne peuvent plus être silencieusement acceptés par l'Occident. Faites pression sur vos élus. Faites connaître la situation à vos proches. Impliquez-vous ou donnez aux organisations qui militent pour les droits humains. Nous avons un devoir envers ces personnes sous le joug du Parti communiste chinois. Faites de la cause ouïghour la vôtre. Je m'appelle Alexis Brunel-Duceppe, je suis député du Bloc québécois et j'appuie le peuple ouïghour.
Thank you, Michael Marston, and thank you, B'nai B'rith, for organizing this virtual event to shed a light for the unfolding Uyghur genocide being committed by the Chinese government against Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in East Turkestan. It is an important moment, and we appreciate your support, and we appreciate the support from Jewish communities across the world. As you know, probably on October 21st, the International Human Rights Subcommittee of Canadian Parliament has acknowledged the atrocities committed by the Chinese government against Uyghurs as a genocide. and called upon the Canadian government to take concrete measures, working by international allies to stop this madness and prevent this ongoing genocide. At this moment, the Uyghurs around the world, we have seen the tremendous amount of support coming out from Jewish communities in Europe, in the United States, in Canada, Australia, and other parts of the world. And many Jewish organizations, including B'nai B'rith, already issued statement and condemned the Chinese genocidal policy against Uyghurs. And some Jewish community members across Canada coming out on certain days of each week in front of the Chinese missions or Chinese embassies in cities, to protesting against their treatment and protesting their genocidal policy and a genocide committed against Uyghurs. And at this important moment, as Uyghurs, we do not forget and we do not allow our next generation to forget who is supporting us at this crucial moment and who is rallying behind the Chinese government and supporting the Chinese genocidal policy. It is not surprising that this support are coming from Jewish communities for our freedom fight and our fight to stop this Chinese madness. And especially this support is important because majority of Muslim countries now rallying behind Chinese government, even supporting the Chinese destruction of Islamic belief of the Muslim Uyghurs, and supporting the Chinese genocide committed against Muslim Uyghurs. And history will record them well. And at this time, before ending my remark, I would like to share some of the statements already made by very famous or prominent figures about Uyghur genocide and the alarm bell they sent for our attention. Anna Applebaum, the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and survivor of Soviet Gulag, wrote in Washington Post recently, "In China, never again is happening again." Fred Halat, editorial page editor of the Washington Post, also stated recently, "In China, every day is Kristallnacht." Dr. Alan J. Kennedy, the executive director of World Without Genocide at Michelle Hamline School of Law, wrote recently, "High-tech genocide from Jews to Uyghurs." And we know that in Auschwitz Memorial Museum displayed the mountains of hairs taken from Jewish victims after murdering them in a gas chamber. And recently, U.S. Border and Customs Agency has seized 13 tons of women's hair came from imprisoned Uyghur women in concentration camps. And we don't know how many more ships we missed and how many more ships Chinese government sent to different parts of the world selling this human hair products coming from Uyghur prisoners, especially from women. But at least we know this. To make 13 tons of human hair, you need to shave off at least 300,000 Uyghur women's hair. It is shocking. And for this reason, I would like to thank one more time for all panelists and all listeners, at the same time the organizer of this event, the B'nai B'rith, and Michael Moston. Please stay well and stay safe. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you all for joining B'nai B'rith Canada's panel discussion on the human rights tragedy of the Uyghur Muslims. My name is Ryan Yukashi, National Director of the League for Human Rights of B'nai B'rith Canada, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's discussion. The Uyghur Muslims are an ethnic and religious minority indigenous largely to China's northwestern Xinjiang province, also known as East Turkestan, and have faced discrimination and persecution at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party for decades. There have long been credible reports indicating that large numbers of Uyghurs, with some estimates exceeding 1 million, have been forcibly interned in detainment camps where they face various forms of forcible confinement, repression, forced labor, mass surveillance, population control, and a host of other forms of physical and mental abuse with no access to due process or legal protections. Dolkun Issa, president of the World Uyghur Congress, has characterized what is happening to the Uyghurs at the hands of the Chinese government as a full-scale ethnic genocide through the use of vast networks of concentration camps, torture, and death chambers. Mehmet Todi, executive director of the Uyghurs' Rights Advocacy Project of Canada, has publicly lamented the shocking silence of many nations around the world to the plight of the Uyghur minority. Canada and other like-minded countries have called on China to grant meaningful and immediate access to its detention facilities by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. In October of this year, the House of Commons Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development stated that the actions of the Chinese Communist Party constituted genocide as laid out in the Genocide Convention. To learn more about what is happening on the ground in China, as well as initiatives here at home and around the world, it is my honor to introduce tonight's distinguished panelists. We have Dr. Razia Mahmoud, Vice President of International Support for Uyghurs, a national organization based in Montreal, Canada, with a stated mandate to supporting and amplifying the voice of Uyghurs and other Turkic people oppressed by the Chinese Communist Party in East Turkestan through advocacy projects and grassroots initiatives in Canada and around the world. We have the Honorable David Kilgour, first elected to the Parliament of Canada in 1979 from Edmonton, Alberta. Kilgour was re-elected 7 times and served as Deputy Speaker and Chair of the Committees of the whole House, as well as various posts, including Secretary of State for Latin America and Africa, and as Secretary of State for Asia Pacific. As the former chair of the Parliamentary Group for Soviet Jewry between 1984 and 1986, he was recognized by B'nai B'rith for bringing the plight of Soviet Jewry to the attention of Canadians. In 2009, he published with co-panelist David Matus, Bloody Harvest, The Killing of Falun Gong for Their Organs. He and Matus were nominated for the 2010 Nobel Peace Prize, and he is one of the founders of the International Coalition to End Organ Pillaging in China. David Matus is an international human rights, refugee, and immigration lawyer based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. He is the honorary senior counsel to B'nai B'rith Canada and represents B'nai B'rith as a member of the Canadian delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. David has written or edited 11 books on human rights issues, and in 2008, he was awarded the Order of Canada. So with that, let's turn to our panel of experts to discuss the situation more in depth. So beginning with you, Razia, maybe for the benefit of course, myself and those tuning in, please tell us a little bit about the Uyghur people and what is happening to them in China right now.
To begin with, I would like to thank you for organizing this event, and I would like to thank you, this Jewish community, for tireless support of the Jewish community for Uyghurs. On September, we have 1 week organized for 1 week protest front of the Chinese embassy by Ottawa Jewish community. And we are having every week right now, every Thursday for the Uyghurs front of protest, same protest front of the Chinese embassy in support of Uyghurs. So I would really like to thank you for all Jewish community here in Ottawa and in Canada. So at the same time, I would like to thank you, David and Alex Polowan, to introduce us, our group, to your group and your team. And so, and I will start to explain a little bit about Uyghurs. We are actually mostly ethnically and culturally Turkic people. And we mainly live in Central Asia. We have 20 million population in East Turkestan. And the other population is situated and located in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. So we are around 35 million people, and we are very distinguishedly different from Chinese people. We are our language profile, culture is very different. East Turkestan, actually this name it after we are not in only Uyghurs living there, also there is Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and a little bit amount and a small amount of Khoi. That's why it's named after all the Turkic people as East Turkestan. And it is called by China as Xinjiang. This means a new frontier. It is colonial name. And Uyghur, this name itself means united, bring together. So we all Turkic people living together there since centuries. Other than that, I would like to emphasize Uyghurs are Uyghurs like our strategic place. This location is very important. It is bordered with several countries: Russia, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, India, even Tibet, and Mongolia. So geopolitically, it's very important in the center of Central Asia. And East Turkestan also has very rich, vast land. It's 1/6 of whole China, and also very rich in minerals. It has 40% of whole coal source of China, and also energy. And vast land has lots of natural gas, main resource of natural gas for China. And also gold, minerals, and it's really very rich resource. Most importantly, it is 80% of cotton from East Turkestan. 80% of cotton of China is from East Turkestan. So as you know, 20% the most cotton products comes from the China worldwide. So it is mainly sourced from East Turkestan.
Okay. So with that understanding of the importance of the region to China and sort of the history of the Uyghur and other Turkic peoples there, you know, it's no secret. I mean, why the panel's even convened today, we have heard of a variety of allegations surrounding mass detentions and surveillance and population repression and control, and other human rights abuses by the Chinese government. What can be done by Canada and Canadians to address these issues? And I'd open up this question to anyone here who wished to address it. Maybe David, I saw you wanted to chime in.
Which David
made it. David made us motion.
Yes, well, I mean, we have a number of different opportunities here to do something. We have legislation called Magnitsky Act legislation, which allows us to list perpetrators, and it would ban their entry, it would seize their assets, and it would allow for their prosecution should they arrive in Canada. We have an importation tariff item, which allows us to prevent the importation of products that are produced from forced labor. And we could easily just say that anything coming from Xinjiang or East Turkestan is presumptively produced by forced labor, and we could use that. There's a bill before Parliament right now, which would allow for the prosecution of complicity in organ transplant abuse abroad. And there's compelling evidence that Uyghurs, as well as Falun Gong and other prisoners of conscience, are victims of this abuse. There's the larger sanctions legislation, special economic measures legislation, which we could use against China. There's international mechanisms that we could try. There's the possibility of asking the Security Council to refer the matter to the International Criminal Court. China has a veto in the Security Council, but we could at least try it. But anyhow, there's a lot of different options that are available where we could at least try to do something to bring attention to this problem.
Yeah, I might add. Can I add something to that?
Of course.
I was hoping that Dr. Mahmoud would talk about her experiences when she studied in Shanghai. I think she wouldn't mind if I mentioned one. Will you please tell them what happened when you went to a shopping center in Shanghai after you got accepted with great difficulty to study for your master's degree in Shanghai? Because to me, it says everything about how the government of China treats minority communities?
Actually, as I want to emphasize a little bit what's going on there to begin with, because it is terrible things going on in my homeland, and up to 3 million people locked up in concentration camps. It called by Chinese government re-education camps. But when I look at Chinese website, official website, I can read in Chinese and Uyghur. They said since 2017 to 2020, they have re-educated more than 4,700,000 people in our region. So it is not only 3 million, it is more than almost 5 million people already somehow get into concentration camps, short or long, we don't know. So that's what's it. And the oppression is not only in the concentration camps, it's 500,000 of children separated from family and locked into, sent to state-run orphanages. And there are also forced sterilization, forced labor, everything is going on. And this concentration camps condition is inhuman, insane. It is poor sanitation, they're shackled, the detainees shackled, and in one small cell, there are 70 people living in a small cell, and they are tortured. They are having specific unknown pills every day. And biometric data is collected, DNA is collected, blood test is done. Those all are like unwillingly forced. Everything is in unhuman condition. It's ongoing in unhuman condition. This discrimination, this kind of oppression, it's not new. It's back in, I remember all my life, I kind of suffering this kind of discrimination when I was in Uyghur land. And I will give an example, as David mentioned. At that time, I was at university in Shanghai. That was back in 90s. And then at that time, this big malls, shopping malls is state-owned. So when I get to shopping mall, every time when I get to shopping mall, the security will call through a microphone that Xinjiangren. Xinjiangren means people from East Turkestan, Xinjiang, get into mall. Watch your wallet, watch your purse. Take attention for your security, watch your wallet, watch your purse. It has happened to me several times. Since then, I never go to any state-owned shopping mall. And when I get to in a bus, I was harassed as woman. And then since then, I never take the bus. It is 4 years. I was just like around the school, university. I never go to it. It is incredible, so sad story. It writes until it stays in my mind, in my heart until now.
Yeah, can I just add one thing to that? It's capital R racism. I think we've talked about that, Dr. Mahmoud, and it's inhuman. And of course, it's not just the Uyghurs; it's others who are not Han Chinese are treated similarly terribly.
Yeah, that was back. That was back in 90s. When I 2002, when I ready to go to Belgium, and 2002 when I get to Beijing, that was back in Beijing 2002. I was not able to admissible to hotel because I show my ID that was written Uyghur from Xinjiang, from East Turkestan, and then I was not able to admit any hotel in Beijing.
Yeah, it's by the way, Dr. Mahmoud speaks, I think she speaks 6 languages. English was the last one she learned. So you can speak any of the others if you like. Can I pick up on something that I think relates to this that happened, I guess, a few weeks ago in Beijing? There was a meeting of the China-Canada Business Council. And I'm not sure how many Canadians were there, but I gather it was 20 or 25 were there. they were meeting with their Chinese equivalents. And according to the Globe and Mail, somebody got up and made a speech about Meng Huawei, the Meng who's in sort of custody in Vancouver. And everybody in the room got up and booed and said, this is terrible, basically that's happening to her. And then some brave soul got up and said, what about the two Michaels that have been in terrible prison custody now for, I think it's 700 days? And do you know what happened amongst the group, which included 20 or 25 Canadians? Absolutely nothing. None of the Canadians from the Canada-China Business Council had the backbone to get up and protest or applaud or do what had been done for the other so-called victim. And to me, this is absolutely greed with a capital G. And it seems to me that since our trade, in fact, has gone up with China during the pandemic, given the way they're treating the Uyghurs and so many other Falun Gong Christians, Tibetans, and so on, I seriously ask why we should be doing any trade with China. There are lots of people out there who could supply stuff to us, and I don't know why we have to trade with a regime that, as we've heard and we'll hear more of, is behaving very much like the Nazis did during the 30s and 40s. That's how. And thank goodness today in the Ottawa Citizen, Dr. Margaret McCraig Johnson writes a very strong article too. And I think the opinion now in Canada is about 85% of us are very much distrust the government of China. Anyway, I'm sure the others, let the others please say something. Do you want to say something on that, Razia?
No, I would like to listen as a panelist.
I'm curious. You bring up Canada, David, and one question that I wanted to ask was, there are also reports of harassment of Uyghurs living in Canada on this matter. So I was curious, can anyone here speak to who's carrying out this harassment, what this harassment looks like here at home? Because it seems like the harassment extends now beyond the borders of China.
Well, yeah, yesterday at the Chinese embassy, we had Mehmet Toti was there. He showed me something which just stunned me. Razi, have you seen what he's got in his emails about his mother?
No.
He hasn't seen his mother for, I don't think, for 3 years. He had no contact with her. The day he was testifying at the subcommittee on human rights, he got an email from her home. And I don't even want to repeat the wording of it, but basically it was a completely inhuman thing about his mother. In other words, if you testify today, we're going to, this is what we're going to do. And to me, is so much like the Nazis. I don't know what one can say, but we should not be carrying on business as usual with the government and treats its people, including the Uyghurs, this way.
Yeah, I would say generally there is a lot of internet harassment. There's also surrogates that are used in universities. There's the Confucius Institutes and the Chinese Students Associations. There's people that are brought in from China to try to persuade people to go back to China, and sometimes they come in under false pretenses. There's pressure put on institutions and people to stop speaking, cancel events. And this is, you were asking about what could be done, and I think this is another thing that could be done. We need much more effective foreign interference legislation. We don't have anything that really is comprehensive, that says you can't send foreign agents here to harass Canadians, and we need legislation like that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what would that legislation kind of look like in your mind?
Well, there is such legislation in other countries. Basically, it requires anybody operating for a government to register as a foreign agent, and then if you're acting as a foreign agent but not registered, you're subject to penalties. So that's the way it would look.
Okay. So I have you alluded to these various rights abuses, David Kilgore. I have to differentiate. Both of you, though, wrote a report concerning the Falun Gong some years ago and organ harvesting that is, the organ harvesting issue pertaining to the Falun Gong community, there's also reports that similar things are happening with the Uyghur community. Could either of you speak to this and what's going on there and what's being done about that?
Yes, David Kilgore and I, we focused our research on Falun Gong, and we did notice at the time that there were some other prisoner conscious victims, Uyghurs, Tibetans, and House Christians, but they were in smaller numbers at the time that we did our report. But what's been happening since has been a very large transplant boom in China, largely from detained Falun Gong sources. And the result of this transplant boom, which has been a primary source of organs in China for Chinese, but also globally for the transplant tourism market, it's led to a depletion of the detained Falun Gong. But there's this huge infrastructure that basically finances, in large part, the whole Chinese health system, not just the transplant system. And so with the depletion of Falun Gong, they've been looking for other sources, and largely the replacement has come from the Uyghur population. So what we see is a significant boom in transplant infrastructure in Xinjiang itself, but also the organs are being moved out of Xinjiang. People who are potential organ sources are also being moved out of Xinjiang. And a lot of the evidence that we've seen historically about organ transplantation is, for instance, the systematic blood testing, organ examination.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the advertisements are in Arabic in the various sites throughout China, which is catering to the global market. So I mean, one of the striking things which anybody can see is now in a couple airports in Xinjiang, on the ground in the airports, embedded on airport concrete is signs saying special lanes for movement of organs that are being flown out of Xinjiang. So, that's a very obvious indicator of the problem there.
Okay.
So
Can I add?
Cavalier.
Ethan, Radio Free Asia on November the 18th broadcast about what David was just speaking about, and Ethan Gutman went on and spoke about this broadcast, because as he pointed out, he said that in Aksu city, which is about 600,000 people in Xinjiang, East Turkestan, one of the hospitals was transformed into a second internment camp. There's a large crematorium as well as a green corridor. I'll explain that in a second. Gutman, who's been studying this for many years, these organ pillaging, and he's part of David Matus and I, we did a joint report. He says that he thinks that's what's happening is that the crematorium, the hospital, people are being killed for their organs, their bodies are being cremated, so there's no evidence, and then the organs are sent, as David mentioned a minute ago, by a speedy lane off to other, usually Shanghai and cities like that, where the organ tourists are waiting, and also where probably the more affluent members of the Chinese Communist Party are waiting for organs too. So it's almost beyond belief that this could be going on. And you may have seen, all of you, the other day they announced that they had charged some doctors in China with organ pillaging. Well, this I think is clearly just to show that they're not doing this, but of course they're doing this on, as we showed in our update in 2016, they're doing this between 60 and 100,000 a year. And I'm sure now with the Uyghurs situation that a great many Uyghurs are being killed for their organs too. And yet we've all got to stand up and get this message out to people. And I thank B'nai B'rith profoundly for doing this.
What comes to mind as well, we're talking here about the Canadian situation, of course, what's happening on the ground in China, but what has been the state of advocacy or public awareness raising in other jurisdictions, in Europe, in the United States? Can you speak to that? What's been the reception to these allegations or these abuses?
We're still trying to get a bill through the Canadian Parliament would ban organ tourism. That hasn't happened. but we're hoping it'll get through this parliament. Didn't quite get
Okay.
through the last. Other countries, of course, Israel was the first to do it. Taiwan has done it. I think Belgium has done it. A number of countries have banned organ tourism. You can't go to China to get a new liver or kidney. That's an offense if you do that. It's still not an offense in Canada. It would be an offense if it happened here. If you go to China, it's perfectly legal at the moment in Canada. So we have to do a lot more in this, and I hope this Parliament will, although it's a minority, I hope somehow we can get something through that has some teeth in it, because David made us, and many of us have been trying for years to get this to pass the Canadian Parliament. David, you want to add something?
Yeah, well, I would say generally in the United States and Europe, and even within the UN system, there's a fair recognition of what's happening in Xinjiang, but there really needs to be more done about it. I think the problem is not so much that people don't know about it, is that although obviously they're not going to know the detail that we hear now today, but the problem is there's not enough being done about it. And I mean, one of the issues that comes up is the surveillance, and the technology. They have facial recognition technology. They have this social credit system where they aggregate data of good and bad behavior. They scoop information from Wi-Fi networks, and a lot of this technology has been, well, obviously developed by Chinese technology companies, including Huawei. And so that becomes very much an issue about, should Huawei be present? And right now, and this is another area where we can act. I mean, the Five Eyes, which are 5 countries that work together in security matters, all 4 of them, except Canada, have now decided to ban Huawei, and I would suggest Canada join that group as well.
Okay. So, concerning what's going on, then there has been discussion about bringing Chinese perpetrators of Uyghur victimization to the International Criminal Court. How can China be brought before the court, and what obstacles, if any, stand in the way of such a process?
I mean, there is a legal way of doing it. I mentioned the Security Council, but there's possibly another way of doing it. There was a recent judgment in the court that said Myanmar that the court had jurisdiction over Myanmar, even though Myanmar is not a party to the court treaty, because there have been people that are fleeing Myanmar because of the persecution of the Rohingyas that are now in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is a state party to the court. And the fact that the Rohingya from Myanmar or Bangladesh gives the court jurisdiction over Myanmar. And of course, there are many Uyghur refugees around the world, including Canada, which is a state party to the court. And so there may be a possible line of argument or submission that can be made that the court would have jurisdiction, because the refugees, the Uyghur refugees from Xinjiang are now in state signatory countries.
Well, you may all know, I'm sure, that the House of Representatives in the US passed, I think it was 406 to 4, virtually unanimously, a measure saying that no goods coming from Xinjiang, or from China for that matter, would be allowed in unless US Customs could authenticate that there had been no slave labor, forced labor involved in making them. Something like that would probably have a lot more impact on the horrific practices going on in East Turkestan and elsewhere in China in terms of the organ pillaging than going to the International Criminal Code or trying to grapple with the Security Council, where, of course, China has a lot of clout. Razia, you could perhaps, I think you were telling me the other day that nobody is allowed into East Turkestan now, private citizens, diplomats from other countries. Maybe we could tell the diplomats from China that they could not go to British Columbia, or they couldn't leave their 5 missions in Canada, and they couldn't leave the cities where those are located. They treat us like fools, but we treat them as if they're all complete, respectable, kind individuals. And that's, again, why we have to steal the backbones of, as new President-elect Biden said the other day, the United States has to steal their backbones, and Canada certainly has to steal its backbone more than most.
Yeah, I appreciate what my colleague David says about the difficulty engaging with the international system, and China has an unfortunate weight in that that's disproportionate, as important as China is. And but nonetheless, I think it's worth engaging because the political cost it imposes on China and the visibility it gives to the violations. Another possible avenue is the General Assembly, where a majority of votes carries the day, and China doesn't have a veto. And what the General Assembly can do is pass a resolution asking for an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice whether what's happening in Xinjiang is genocide of the Uyghurs. And they have asked advisory opinions in the past in various situations, and it might be worthwhile trying to do that as well.
Concerning all these advocacy ideas, I want to raise the question with you, Dr. Mahmoud. What has been, with international support for Uyghurs and maybe other organizations you work with, what have been your most successful advocacy initiatives, and what have been some of the challenges you've faced?
I don't know how we can measure this successfulness, because I think, we could say we are successful in Canada because this Human Rights Subcommittee formally recognized China's oppression in East Turkestan as genocide. That is, I think, that's a good indication of our advocacy in Canada. However, Canadian government not officially acknowledge this recognition. So Canadian government should acknowledge this recognition to act. If we don't acknowledge, we can't act, right? So that's what our suggestion. And also we are contacting with MPs. We are sending newsletter every week. We are keep updating what's going on in East Turkestan every week since last year. So it seems things moving forward, but it is very slow because of we have it is issue. There is issue. China has hostage diplomacy, and we already have 2 persons under their hand, and also one Uyghur, 2 Michaels, and the one Uyghur Hussein Janjil since 15 years in Chinese prison. So they don't. Chinese government, they don't accept the complaint. They deny everything. Any accusation, they deny any accusation. So it is very hard, and also they have retaliation, pressure, diplomacy, and hostage diplomacy. So it makes things even harder. However, we can work together with worldwide. We can, if there is sanction, coordinated sanction with other countries, and it makes difference. I believe they still care about their reputation. That's why they deny. They don't want to look bad worldwide. They deny. However, we should have hard stand. I grew up there. I know how they responded to things. But if you're harder, they will back. If you're weak, they will. Now they won't let you go. So we should be in coordination with Five Eyes, coordination with like-minded countries, work together to take hard stand, because we give them 30 years after Tiananmen massacre, 30 years to have democracy, but it didn't work out. If democracy didn't work out, we should take hard stand.
Yeah, if I may add to that, I think that also what we need to see, I think that would be helpful, is solidarity and among the various victim communities, because the victimization of Uyghurs is awful, but unfortunately it's not isolated. I mean, there's the Tibetans, there's Hong Kong, there's the Mongolians, there's the Falun Gong. And what we see is a sequence and pattern of victimization, which is the carrying out of communist practices and ideology, just picking on various groups. And I think all of these groups should be getting together, and we should be helping them get together. And whenever we protest victimization, we should protect the whole sequence, because I think that highlights the more systemic problem that that China poses to its own, the Communist Party poses to its own country and to the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's there's no justification for these kinds of abuses, but I have to ask, what is the justification that is typically offered by the Chinese Communist Party for doing what it is that they're doing? Or is it strictly relegated to just denials? Like, how is it treated from their perspective when broached on the subject?
Well, there's a lot. Go ahead,
you
please.
Please, Razia.
Yeah, well,
Dr. Mahmoud, please, you can take.
I mean, I think you have to look at the
David,
internal.
let her speak. Let her speak. Please.
Dr. Mahmoud first, and then we'll go to you, David.
Okay, actually, since very long, it's back into 50s. This Uyghur culture treated as Uyghur, we kept our traditional cultures are treated as backwards, and our religion treated as mental disease. It's been happened since 50s. 1949, Chinese Communist Party occupied East Turkestan and then named it Xinjiang Autonomous Region. So since then, they are treating our culture, our tradition as backwards. So and then now, what they are doing is they need place, they need population migration to take over our land. And then, but they still think we are a threat to them. We hosted them, that's why they can settle down. At the beginning, like 3% of the Chinese population, now it's 50% of population in East Turkestan is Chinese. They settle down, and now they still think we are a threat because our different identity, just our different cultural identity is threat to them. They want to one China, one person, one idea, everything is one under the Communist Party. They don't accept anything different culture, different identity, different view. It's not possible. So that's what they are treating as us a threat. And then they think also we are just terrorists because some it's happened in the past, people protesting, but it is just protest to for the injustice. It is against the injustice, unemployment, excluded from economic development in our own land. But Chinese Communist Party government always views those are the terrorist attack, terrorist action. So they are under a shadow of anti-terrorism, and then they want to re-educate all the people to assimilate. That's why they are justifying as they are counter-terrorism. That's counter-terrorism, extremist religion as treated as extremist, mental disease. That's why that's their shadow to the oppression.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that. David, you wanted to chime in earlier. Do you still want to make a comment to that or add a comment?
Yes, well, I mean, when you're asking for motivation, I mean, it varies from person to person, and also even individual persons have a variety of motivations for what they do. I mean, everything that we've heard up to now is completely accurate. That there is racism, there is greed, there's also denial, search for impunity. There's this Chinese communist empire. I mean, Chinese communism controls not just the Han Chinese area, but other areas that they've seized, and the what they call the New Territory is one of those areas that they have seized. There's also the propaganda which they generate, which is partly used ex post facto to justify what they're doing, but it also becomes something they end up believing. there is a distortion caused by communism, which itself is, of course, not democratic. And as a result, what you get in terms of internal debates within the Communist Party is what's good for the Communist Party. I mean, and various people are who are jockeying for position in the party will try to take a stand based on not what's good for China, but what's good or for the population, because they're not being elected, but what's good to keep the party in power. So that kind of debate tends to go more and more extreme, because anybody who says something that's more repressive looks like it's better for the party. And so there's a natural progression towards extreme progression, because that's the way the political debate goes.
Well, I think, can I add to that? I think there's also true that this new leader, and Raja will speak to this, Xi Jinping is far worse than any of the other recent leaders. And somehow we have to hope that they'll go back to having leaders with some common sense and decency and humanity in them. One of the things that I thought was that Xi Jinping, it was an engineer by profession, that he'd been to university, but tell him, Razi, how you think that's worked. He doesn't have a degree at all. Please explain that. I mean, this is the kind of propaganda they put out. He has a degree in party propaganda, is what he has his degree in. And he's never, you told me he's never been to university, as far as you know?
Well, you can buy anything in China if you have money, even your diploma, your everything. So that's totally both. He has only primary school level, and he always make mistakes when reading stuff. So even that's it's not that. I don't think it is. But this whole system, whole party is. They only want to one party, and actually because they are not elected, and this party comes to power because of internal conflict with other party, Kuomintang, for example. So their power legitimacy is always questionable. In one side, it is not elected. Other side, it's not something. They get the power inside of violence through violence, right? In 149. So it is always legitimacy is always questionable. That's why they are really fear about any other different view, different thing against their power, their position. That's the one thing, and also why it is like this constitution comes built up and the forced labor, why it is now 2016, why accelerated at this stage. There is another reason, important reason, is economic belt and the road initiative. So belt and road initiative is very important aspect for China, expand their military economic goal from East Turkestan to Kazakhstan, Central Asia, and Europe. That's in the center of the belt and the road initiative, economic belt. That's why this Communist Party think it's the final solution. If they have to hold on this economic road and the initiative, this economic road, they have to assimilate, they have to eradicate this threat on this road. So that's us. That's the Uyghur people, other Turkic people in East Turkestan hold this nation. It is a threat.
Thank you very much.
That's a lot, a lot to understand here. Cognizant of the time, I want to give each of you a final word before I will read B'nai B'rith Canada's call to action on the Uyghur issue. So I guess I'll begin with the order on my screen here, and I'll ensure that Dr. Mahmoud has the final word on that. So I'll begin with you, David Kilgore. If you could please, if you have any final thoughts you wish to share, please do so.
No, I think it's all been said, or not. A lot of it's been said. It's a huge topic, as you know. But I think the Canadian people now have completely changed their thinking with respect to the government in Beijing. I mentioned before that the Amos poll showed that it was about 85% of Canadians now distrust the government of China. And I can't make the point too strongly that we separate the people of China from the government of China. And especially given Canada's history, I was thinking about this morning, we've had some terrible things happen to people of origin in China in history, as you all know. But I think that's it's a long time ago for Canada. And I think now we treat everybody as equal, and we do not associate people of China with the government of China, certainly not Canadians of origin in China. We have to take a stronger position with respect to trade. We've been made a sucker of. Can you imagine during the pandemic? I read again in the Globe the other day that our imports from China have gone up during the pandemic. And this is bizarre. Why can't we make our own medicines and our own PPEs and so on? We have to use the pandemic, and I hope from what we've heard this morning as well, to show that we're concerned about Canadians and democracy and human dignity. And here's a perfect place to start.
Thank you, David. David Matus, do you have any remarks?
Yes, well, when you introduced me, you'd mentioned that for B'nai B'rith, I've been a delegate to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and we just had a meeting this past couple of weeks in Leipzig, which I've been communicating through Zoom. And one of the academic advisor for IRA is now Yehuda Bauer, and one of the things he often says is the Holocaust was the unique, but he said it was unprecedented, but not unique, in the sense that it never happened before, but it's been happening since in various ways. I mean, there are some specific features to Holocaust, but some of the things we see in Xinjiang or the East Turkestan are we've seen in the Holocaust. The use of modern technology, the use, the perpetration by an advanced economy against a minority, the relative indifference or silence of the rest of the world, the absolute lack of limit at the depths of evil to which people can sink. And I think we have to realize that these sorts of problems, we just see them coming up again and again in different locations. And we really need to mobilize globally humanity to try to prevent them, this continuation. Because as technology develops, it becomes easier and easier to victimize large swaths of population, as we can see in Xinjiang, and simply to protect their survival of the human species, we've got to stand against these sorts of violations.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you. Dr. Mahmoud, please.
We want to call Canadian government to, in short term, because in long term, of course, it is our goal is to close the concentration camps, stop the genocide. But in short term, they should amplify Magnitsky Act, Magnitsky legislation to sanction those Chinese officials aligned up with perpetration of gross human rights. And then violation, and also these companies who's working with benefiting from forced labor, and those companies are providing technology for surveillance of whole population. That should be stopped. That should be have Magnitsky Act to have sanction, and also foreign interference, because we are not feeling safe even if we are in Canada as Uyghur, as activists, again, even more. So we need, there's a action, or there's a legislation act to protect Uyghurs in Canada and bring other countries, Uyghurs in other country as refugee to avoid this deportation of Uyghurs to China back. It's one way to death. So and also we want Canada have a legislation against the foreign interference. That can be protect for Uyghurs and also Canadian. It's on for own Canadians too.
Okay, thank you very much. On behalf of B'nai B'rith, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read out the call to action for you to hear and for the viewers to hear, and encourage them to join. So B'nai B'rith Canada encourages you all to make your voices heard and join our call to action in ensuring that the government of Canada presses Chinese authorities for complete and unfettered access to detention facilities in Xinjiang by the United Nations, produces a detailed and unfiltered report on the condition of the Uyghurs, condemns the persecution of the Uyghurs and other minorities, particularly Muslims, by the Chinese Communist Party, speak out at the United Nations and plead for concerted international efforts to protect the persecuted Uyghur population from the hands of the Chinese regime, and use Canada's Magnitsky legislation passed in 2017 to sanction key officials of the Chinese government implicated in human rights violations involving the Uyghur community. B'nai B'rith, as always, will never be silent in the face of injustice and persecution, no matter whom it targets. So again, I want to thank you all for your time. I want to thank you, Dr. Mahmoud, for sharing, representing your community. And I understand sharing was obviously the painful details of what's occurring to the Uyghur and other Turkic peoples in China. And for both Davids, for sharing your expertise, your longstanding expertise and your hard work on this matter. It's more appreciated than you can understand, and I understand how tiring it can be. But it goes without saying that I think Canada and the world over appreciates all of your work that you all do. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll get results on this one way or the other.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again for everything.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All the best.